They say every empire falls eventually, but nobody tells you what happens when the queen decides to burn it down herself. Tonight, in the most expensive ballroom in Manhattan, a woman in black is about to destroy the man who thought he owned her. 7 years of silence, 7 years of lies, and one moment that will shatter everything. This is the story of Seraphina Moretti, the invisible wife who became the most dangerous woman in America. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels across the world. The champagne was still cold when Damien Cross decided to humiliate his wife in front of 300 people. Seraphina stood near the marble column at the edge of the grand ballroom, her fingers wrapped loosely around the stem of a glass she had no intention of drinking. The Metropolitan Opera House glittered around her like a jewelry box, crystal chandeliers throwing fractured light across silk gowns and tailored tuxedos, the kind of wealth that didn't need to announce itself because everyone already knew the price of admission. She watched her husband laugh, not the private laugh she used to know. The public one. The performance. Damien stood in the center of a tight circle of investors and politicians, his hand resting possessively on the lower back of a woman who was not his wife. Celeste Vale wore red tonight, a dress so tight it looked painted on, diamonds dripping from her ears like fresh blood. She tilted her head back when she laughed, exposing the column of her throat, making sure every man in the room understood exactly what Damien Cross had claimed for himself. Seraphina felt nothing. That was new. There was a time, maybe 2 years ago, maybe 3, when watching Damien touch another woman would have carved something vital out of her chest. She would have gone home and cried in the bathroom with the water running so he wouldn't hear. She would have asked herself what she had done wrong, what she could fix, how she could become the kind of woman a man like Damien Cross would choose to keep. But that version of Seraphina was dead now. She died slowly, quietly, the way everything about Seraphina had always been quiet. "More champagne, Mrs. Cross." A server appeared at her elbow, young and nervous, holding a silver tray. Seraphina turned her head slowly, offering the kind of soft smile she had perfected over 7 years of being invisible. "No, thank you." Her voice was gentle, forgettable. The server nodded and moved on without a second glance, already dismissing her as another wealthy wife with nothing interesting to say. Good. Seraphina took a single sip of champagne and let her eyes drift across the ballroom. She recognized almost everyone here, Senator Williams near the bar, pretending he didn't take bribes. Catherine Joe by the windows, her tech fortune built on stolen patents, her lawyers buried in offshore accounts. The Vandenberg twins working the room like apex predators, their hedge fund collapsing in slow motion while they smiled through capped teeth. Manhattan's elite, America's royalty. Every single one of them would be bankrupt within a decade if the right people stopped protecting them. People like her father. Seraphina's fingers tightened imperceptibly around her glass. She hadn't thought about Vittorio Moretti in years. She had built walls in her mind to keep him out, thick walls, the kind that don't come down easy. Loving Damien had required those walls. Marrying him had required burning every bridge back to the world she came from. But lately, the walls were cracking. Seraphina. She turned. Margaret Chen stood beside her, perfectly composed in emerald silk, her expression caught between pity and curiosity. They had known each other since college, back when Seraphina was still pretending to be ordinary, before Damien, before any of this became real. "Margaret." Seraphina's smile didn't reach her eyes. "You look lovely." "So do you." Margaret's gaze flickered toward Damien and Celeste, then back. Her voice dropped. "Are you okay?" "Of course." "Seraphina, I'm fine, Margaret. Really." The words came out smooth as glass. Seraphina had practiced them so many times they didn't even feel like lying anymore. Margaret hesitated, her fingers twisted around her clutch, and Seraphina could see the calculation happening behind her eyes. The social math of whether getting involved was worth the cost. It never was. "If you need anything," Margaret said finally, her voice trailing off into nothing, "I know where to find you." Margaret squeezed her hand once, a brief pressure that meant everything and nothing, then disappeared back into the crowd. Seraphina was alone again. She preferred it that way. Across the ballroom, Damien threw his head back, laughing at something Celeste whispered in his ear. His hand slid lower on her waist. Possessive. Public. A statement. Seraphina felt her phone vibrate in her clutch. She pulled it out carefully, angling the screen away from the crowd. One message, no name, just a number she had told herself she would never call again. It's time. 2 words. Seraphina stared at them until the screen went dark. Her reflection stared back at her from the black glass. A woman in a beige dress that cost $4,000 and looked like it came from a department store clearance rack. Soft curls, minimal jewelry. The kind of elegant invisibility that Manhattan society expected from women who married powerful men. Damien had picked this dress for her. He always did. "You look perfect," he had told her 3 hours ago, adjusting her necklace in the mirror of their penthouse bedroom. His hands had been gentle, almost loving. Simple. Classic. That's my Seraphina. Simple. The word had landed like a slap she wasn't supposed to feel. She had smiled and thanked him. Now, standing in the ballroom watching him parade his mistress like a trophy, Seraphina felt something cold and sharp settle into her chest. Not anger, not heartbreak. Something older than both. Recognition. She knew what she had to do. The phone vibrated again. The car is waiting. Seraphina looked up. Through the crowd, past the champagne towers and the string quartet, she saw the ballroom doors. Beyond them, the marble hallway. Beyond that, the world she had walked away from 7 years ago. The world that never stopped waiting for her to come home. She set her champagne glass down on a passing tray. Then she walked. Nobody noticed. Seraphina had spent 7 years becoming the kind of woman nobody noticed. She moved through the crowd like smoke. There and gone. Elegant and weightless. The perfect accessory to a powerful man's life. People's eyes slid right past her. Conversations didn't pause when she approached. Invisible. Exactly the way Damien wanted her. She reached the doors and slipped through. The hallway was cooler, quieter. Her heels clicked against marble, the sound swallowed by velvet wallpaper and oil paintings worth more than most people's houses. Seraphina walked past them without looking. She had memorized this building years ago. Every exit, every stairwell, every service corridor that led to streets the elite never saw. Old habits. Her father's training. The main doors of the opera house opened onto the street, and cold November air hit her face like a baptism. Seraphina breathed it in, feeling something wake up in her chest that had been sleeping for far too long. A black Mercedes idled at the curb. The back door opened. A man stepped out, tall, mid-50s, his face carved from the same Brooklyn stone that built empires and buried bodies. He wore a suit that cost more than the average person made in a year, but it was his eyes that mattered. Dark, patient, loyal. Carlo Benetti, her father's oldest captain, the man who taught her how to shoot when she was 12. "Principessa," he said quietly. The word hit her harder than she expected. Princess. Nobody had called her that in 7 years. Seraphina looked at him for a long moment, memorizing the lines around his eyes, the gray in his hair, all the years that had passed while she played at being someone else. "I need to see him," she said. Carlo nodded once. "He's been waiting." She slid into the car. The door closed behind her with the soft, final sound of a vault sealing shut. The interior smelled like leather and gunpowder, a combination that should have felt foreign after all this time, but instead felt like coming home. Carlo got into the driver's seat. The Mercedes pulled smoothly into traffic, and Manhattan blurred past the tinted windows, towers of glass and steel built on money that came from places nobody wanted to talk about. Seraphina's phone buzzed again. This time it was Damien. "Where are you?" She stared at the message. 3 words. No concern. Just the question of a man who had misplaced something he owned. Her fingers hovered over the screen. She thought about everything she could say, everything she should say. 7 years of silence building up behind her teeth like floodwater against a dam. Instead, she turned the phone off and dropped it in her clutch. "Where is he?" she asked Carlo. "The house in Red Hook." Of course. The warehouse district. Far from Manhattan's glittering surface, down in the industrial bones of Brooklyn, where the Moretti family still owned half the waterfront through companies with names nobody could trace back. Her father's kingdom. The place she swore she would never return to. The car moved through the city like a shark through dark water, silent, inevitable. They crossed the Brooklyn Bridge, and Seraphina watched the lights of Manhattan shrink behind them. Somewhere back there, Damien was probably looking for her. annoyed that his wife had wandered off during his big night, inconvenienced. He had no idea what was coming. None of them did, them. 20 minutes later, the Mercedes turned down a street that didn't exist on any map. Warehouses rose on either side like sleeping giants, their windows dark, their doors locked against a world that had learned not to ask questions. Carlo pulled up to a building that looked abandoned. It wasn't. Two men in dark suits materialized from the shadows. One opened Seraphina's door. The other scanned the street with eyes that missed nothing. Soldiers. Her father's men. Seraphina stepped out of the car and both men went still. She saw recognition flicker across their faces, shock maybe, or something close to fear. One of them was young, maybe 25, too young to remember her from before, but the other was older. His eyes widened. "Madonna," he whispered. Seraphina didn't respond. She walked past them toward the warehouse door, her heels clicking against concrete. Behind her, she heard Carlo murmur something in Italian, a warning, a reminder. The door opened. Inside, the warehouse had been transformed. What looked like industrial decay from the outside was actually a fortress. Reinforced walls, security systems that would make the Pentagon jealous, and beneath the concrete floor, levels that went down into the earth like roots. An elevator waited. Seraphina stepped inside. Carlo joined her. The doors closed, and they descended. Down, down, down into the place where Manhattan's laws meant nothing, and her father's word was the only thing that mattered. The elevator stopped. The doors opened onto a room that looked like it belonged in a different century. Dark wood paneling, leather furniture, bookshelves filled with volumes nobody was allowed to touch, a fireplace burning low. And behind a massive oak desk, backlit by amber light, sat the man who had terrified her entire childhood. Vittorio Moretti. He looked older. The years had carved lines around his eyes and mouth, turned his black hair to silver at the temples. But his hands were still steady as they rested on the desk, and his eyes, dark as oil, sharp as broken glass, still saw everything. He looked at Seraphina for a long moment. Then he stood. "Figlia mia," he said quietly. "My daughter." Seraphina felt something crack in her chest. All the walls she had built, all the distance she had put between herself and this world, suddenly felt paper thin. "Papa," she whispered. It was the first honest word she had spoken in 7 years. Vittorio came around the desk slowly. He moved like a man who had never hurried for anything because everything eventually came to him. When he reached her, he stopped, studied her face. His hand rose, and for a moment Seraphina thought he might touch her cheek the way he used to when she was a child. Instead, he gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Sit." She sat. Vittorio returned to his chair. Behind him, the fireplace crackled. Somewhere in the building above them, she could hear voices, muffled, distant, the sound of an empire conducting its business. "You look like your mother," Vittorio said finally. Seraphina said nothing. She wore that same expression when she was angry, like ice, beautiful and deadly. He paused. "I assume you did not come here to discuss the past." "No." "Then tell me." Vittorio leaned back in his chair. "What brings my daughter back to me after 7 years of silence?" Seraphina met his eyes. Damian Cross. Something flickered across her father's face. Not surprise, recognition. "Your husband?" "Not for much longer." Vittorio's fingers drummed once against the armrest of his chair. "I warned you about him. Do you remember?" She remembered. 7 years ago, when she told her father she wanted to marry Damian, Vittorio had looked at her with something close to pity. "Men like him," he had said quietly, "only love what they think they own. The moment he believes he owns you completely, he will stop seeing you at all." He had been right. "I remember," Seraphina said, "and yet you married him anyway." "I loved him." Love. Vittorio said the word like it was a foreign language he didn't quite trust. "And now I know better." A smile ghosted across her father's face, cold, approving. "What do you want, Seraphina?" She had been asking herself that question for months, lying awake in the penthouse bedroom while Damian slept beside her, or more often, while he didn't come home at all, watching him build his empire on foundations she had poured in secret. Listening to him accept congratulations for victories she had orchestrated behind curtains, he never bothered to look behind. What did she want? Everything, she said quietly. Vittorio's smile widened. Finally, he murmured. You sound like my daughter. He stood again, this time moving to a cabinet against the wall. He opened it and pulled out a decanter of whiskey, the expensive kind, aged longer than most marriages lasted. He poured 2 glasses and handed one to Seraphina. She took it. Tell me about Damien Cross, Vittorio said, returning to his chair. Tell me everything he doesn't know you know. And Seraphina did. She told him about the money. The accounts Damien thought were his, but had actually been seeded with Moretti capital funneled through shell corporations she set up in her first year of marriage. She told him about the investors who only said yes because Carlo had quietly visited them first. The competitors who dropped out of bidding wars because someone suggested it might be healthier for their families if they did. She told him about Celeste Vale, the mistress who had been warming Damien's bed for 8 months while Seraphina played the obedient wife. The woman who wore jewelry purchased with money Damien had siphoned from Seraphina's private trust. The one account he wasn't supposed to know existed, but somehow found anyway. She told him about the divorce papers she had discovered last week, hidden in Damien's office safe. Papers that would leave her with nothing while Damien kept the empire she had built for him. And she told him about tonight, about watching her husband parade his mistress through the most important gala of the year, about the way he looked through Seraphina like she was furniture, a lamp, something decorative and easily replaced. When she finished, the room was silent except for the fire. Vittorio sipped his whiskey. How much does he owe you? He asked finally. Financially, about 2.3 billion, if you count the invisible support. And emotionally? Seraphina looked into her glass. The whiskey caught the firelight, turning amber to gold. More than he could pay in 1,000 lifetimes. Vittorio nodded slowly. He set his glass down and leaned forward, his hands folded on the desk between them. When he spoke, his voice was soft, gentle almost. The way it used to sound when she was small, and he told her bedtime stories about queens and castles and kingdoms that lasted forever. Seraphina, he said, do you know what the difference is between revenge and justice? She had asked him that same question when she was 16. Revenge is personal, she recited. Justice is structural. Good. Vittorio smiled. You remember, revenge would be having Carlo put a bullet in Damien's head. Quick. Clean. Over. He paused. Justice is watching him lose everything slowly enough to understand exactly why it's happening. Justice is making sure he lives long enough to see the empire he stole crumble to nothing. Justice is showing Manhattan that the woman they ignored was the only thing keeping their golden boy alive. Seraphina felt her pulse quicken. I want justice, she said. Then you'll have it. Vittorio stood. But first, you need to understand what you're asking for. Once we do this, there is no going back. The moment we move against Damien Cross, you stop being his wife, and you start being what you were always meant to be. What's that? Vittorio looked at her with something close to pride. La Regina Nera. The Black Queen. The title hit her like a physical thing. She had heard it before, whispered in the background of her father's meetings, muttered by soldiers who didn't know she was listening. The name given to the heir of the Moretti Empire, the one who would inherit everything when Vittorio finally decided to step back from the throne, the role she ran from when she married Damien. I'm ready, Seraphina said. Are you? Vittorio walked around the desk and stopped in front of her. Because the moment we start this, Damien Cross will learn who you really are, and so will everyone else. Manhattan will know. The FBI will know. Every person who ever dismissed you will realize they were standing beside the daughter of the most dangerous man in America. Good. Your life will never be simple again. It was never simple, Papa. I was just pretending. Vittorio studied her face for a long moment. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out something small and dark. A jewelry box. He handed it to her. Open it. Seraphina's fingers shook slightly as she lifted the lid. Inside, resting on black velvet, was a necklace. Not diamonds, not gold. Obsidian and black pearls strung together in a design that looked like it came from another era. Ancient, powerful. The kind of jewelry that wasn't meant to be pretty. It was meant to be recognized. Your mother wore this, Vittorio said quietly. On the night she married me. She told me it made her feel like a queen. He paused. It's been waiting for you. Seraphina lifted the necklace from the box. It was heavier than it looked, substantial, real. Put it on, her father said. She did. The obsidian was cold against her skin. She caught her reflection in the window behind Vittorio's desk, a woman in a beige dress wearing a necklace worth more than most people's houses. A woman caught between two worlds. Not for long. Tomorrow night, Vittorio said, Damien is hosting a private dinner for his investors. Top floor of the Cross building. 20 people, the ones who matter most to his empire. I know. He told me not to come. You're going anyway. Vittorio moved back to his desk and pressed a button. A panel in the wall slid open, revealing a screen. He tapped something on his phone and the screen lit up with files, documents, photographs, bank statements, evidence. This is everything we have on Damien Cross, Vittorio said. Every dirty deal, every illegal move, every corner he cut, and every law he broke to build his empire. He looked at Seraphina. Most of it is connected to money that came from us. Money he doesn't know came from us. Money that's about to become very expensive for him. Seraphina stared at the screen. There were hundreds of documents, maybe thousands. What do you want me to do? Tomorrow night you walk into that dinner dressed like a queen. You bring Carlo and 12 of our best men. You sit at the head of the table, and you show Damien Cross exactly who he married. Vittorio's smile was sharp as a knife. Then you take everything from him. And if he fights back? Let him. Vittorio's eyes glittered. It will only make the fall more satisfying. Seraphina looked in the evidence on the screen, at the necklace around her throat, at her father, who had been waiting 7 years for her to come home. She thought about Damien, about the way he laughed with Celeste tonight, the way he touched her, the way he looked through Seraphina like she was nothing, simple, disposable, wrong. I'll need a new dress, she said quietly. Vittorio's smile widened. Already taken care of, black, armored, the kind that makes men remember why they should be afraid. He walked to the door and opened it. Beyond, Carlo waited. Carlo will take you home. Get some sleep. Tomorrow, you stop being Damien Cross's wife and start being my daughter again. Seraphina stood. The necklace felt like a weight and a promise. She walked to the door, then stopped. Papa? Yes? Thank you. Vittorio looked at her the way he used to when she was small, with love buried so deep beneath duty and violence that most people would never see it. But she did. Don't thank me yet, he said softly. Wait until you see what we're about to do to him. Seraphina left. Carlo drove her back to Manhattan in silence. The city rose around them like a cathedral of glass and steel, and somewhere up there, in the penthouse she had called home for 7 years, Damien was probably already asleep, comfortable, secure in his kingdom. He had no idea the ground beneath him was about to open up. The Mercedes stopped in front of her building. The doorman opened her door, offering the same polite smile he always did. Good evening, Mrs. Cross. She smiled back. Tomorrow, she wouldn't be Mrs. Cross anymore. Tomorrow, she would be something far more dangerous. Seraphina rode the elevator up to the penthouse. The doors opened onto white marble and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a city that thought it knew who she was. They were all wrong. She walked through the apartment, past the living room where she had hosted 1,000 dinners for Damien's investors, past the office where he made the deals that built his empire, past the bedroom where he used to hold her and promise forever. All of it felt like someone else's life now. In the bathroom, she turned on the light and looked at herself in the mirror. The beige dress, the soft curls, the invisible wife. And around her throat, black as midnight, the necklace of a queen. She touched it gently. Then she smiled. It wasn't the soft smile she had perfected for Manhattan society. It was something older, sharper, the smile of a woman who had just remembered exactly who she was. Behind her, she heard the penthouse door open. Damien's voice echoed through the apartment. Seraphina, where the hell did you go? He sounded annoyed, not worried, never worried. She took one last look at her reflection. Then she walked out to greet her husband. One last time. Damien stood in the living room with his jacket off and his tie loosened, scrolling through his phone with the kind of distracted irritation that came from a night that hadn't gone exactly as planned. He didn't look up when Seraphina entered. "There you are," he said, his voice flat. "Where did you disappear to?" Seraphina stopped in the doorway. The marble felt cold beneath her feet, even through her heels. She studied her husband, the way his shoulders hunched slightly forward, the tension in his jaw, the faint smell of Celeste's perfume still clinging to his shirt. "I needed air," she said. "For an hour?" Now he looked up. His eyes scanned her briefly, cataloging, dismissing. Then they caught on the necklace. His brow furrowed. "What's that?" Seraphina's hand moved to the obsidian stones at her throat. Cool, heavy, real. "A gift," she said. "From who?" "Does it matter?" Damien's expression shifted, not quite anger, something closer to ownership being questioned. He set his phone down on the glass coffee table and crossed his arms. "It matters when my wife disappears from the biggest event of the year, wearing jewelry I've never seen before." He took a step toward her. "Who gave it to you, Seraphina?" She could have told him the truth, could have watched his face change when he realized whose daughter he had actually married. But that wasn't the plan. Not yet. "An old friend," she said simply. "What friend?" "Someone from before." "Before what?" "Before you." The words landed like stones in still water. Damien went quiet, his eyes narrowing. He studied her face the way someone might study a familiar painting that had suddenly been hung upside down. "You're being cryptic," he said finally. "Am I?" "Seraphina." Her name came out sharp, a warning. "I don't have time for games tonight. I'm closing a $4 billion deal tomorrow and I need to focus. So whatever this is..." He gestured vaguely at her, at the necklace, at the strange energy she was bringing into his perfectly controlled space. "Can we deal with it later?" There it was. The dismissal. The casual erasure of her existence that had become so routine she had almost stopped noticing it. Almost. Seraphina walked past him into the bedroom. Behind her she heard Damien exhale, a sound caught between exasperation and relief. He thought the conversation was over. He thought she was going to do what she always did, retreat, comply, disappear into the background of his life. She went to the closet and started removing her jewelry, the simple earrings, the delicate bracelet, everything Damien had chosen for her, everything designed to make her look expensive and forgettable at the same time. She kept the necklace on. In the mirror, she could see Damien appear in the doorway behind her. He leaned against the frame, watching her with the distant attention of a man whose mind was already somewhere else. "Celeste asked about you," he said. Seraphina's hand stilled on her earring. "Did she? She wanted to know why you left early." Damien's reflection smiled slightly. "I told her you probably weren't feeling well. You do get those headaches." She didn't get headaches. She had never gotten headaches. That was a lie Damien had invented years ago to explain why his wife sometimes disappeared from events when watching him perform became unbearable. "How thoughtful of you," Seraphina said quietly. "She's not as bad as you think, you know." Damien pushed off the doorframe and walked into the bedroom properly. He sat on the edge of the bed, pulling off his shoes. "Celeste, she's actually very sweet once you get to know her." Seraphina turned slowly. "Is she?" She asked if we could all have dinner sometime, the three of us. Damien looked up, his expression genuinely hopeful in a way that made something dark and cold unfurl in Seraphina's chest. "I think it might be good. Clear the air. She feels terrible about..." He paused, searching for the right words. "About how things look." "How things look," Seraphina repeated. "You know what I mean." "I don't, actually. Explain it to me." Damien's jaw tightened. "Don't do this." "Do what?" "Make this harder than it needs to be." He stood, his patience visibly fraying. "You're a smart woman, Seraphina. You understand how the world works. Celeste and I..." He gestured vaguely, as if their affair was some abstract concept rather than a betrayal he enacted in their bed. "It's complicated, but it doesn't change anything between us." "Doesn't it?" "No." He said it with absolute certainty. "You're my wife. That matters. The partnership we have matters. I'm not some idiot who throws away 7 years of marriage for..." He stopped himself. "For what?" Seraphina's voice was quiet, dangerous. "Finish that sentence, Damien." He had the sense to look uncomfortable. I just mean, look, this doesn't have to be dramatic. We're adults. We can handle this maturely. Maturely? Yes. The way you handled it maturely tonight when you brought your mistress to a public event and introduced her to my friends? She's not your friend, Seraphina. Margaret Chen hasn't called you in 3 months. The accuracy of that statement hit harder than it should have. He was right. Margaret hadn't called. None of them had. Seraphina had spent 7 years building a social circle for Damien's benefit, and every single person in it belonged to him, not her. You're right, she said softly. She's not my friend. None of them are. Damien's expression shifted into something that might have been sympathy if there was any warmth behind it. He crossed to her, reaching for her hands. She let him take them. I know this hasn't been easy for you, he said, his voice dropping into the gentle register he used when he wanted something. I know I haven't been, he paused, choosing his words carefully, as present as I should be. But everything I'm building, everything we're building together, it's all for us, for our future. Seraphina looked down at their joined hands. His were smooth, uncalloused, the hands of a man who had never fought for anything himself because someone else always did it for him. What future? She asked. What do you mean? I mean, what future are we building, Damien? The one where you keep Celeste in a penthouse downtown while I smile for photographers? The one where I watch you accept credit for companies I funded? The one where I'm simple and classic and invisible? His hands tightened on hers, not gentle anymore. Where's this coming from? I found the papers. The words fell into the space between them like a grenade with the pin pulled. Damien went completely still. His face emptied of expression so quickly it was almost impressive. When he spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. What papers? The divorce papers. In your office safe. The one you think I don't know the combination to. For 3 full seconds, Damien said nothing. His mind was working behind his eyes, calculating, recalibrating, searching for the right play. She could almost see the gears turning. Then he let go of her hands and stepped back. That's not what you think it is, he said. No? No, it's, He ran a hand through his hair. It's a contingency, something my lawyers drew up for asset protection. It doesn't mean anything. Asset protection. Yes. From what? From the kind of lawsuits that come when you operate at my level. He was warming to the lie now, his voice gaining confidence. It's standard practice. Every CEO does it. It's not personal. Seraphina tilted her head slightly. The papers leave me with nothing, Damien. How is that not personal? You're misunderstanding the legal language. I understand it perfectly. I have a law degree, remember? She watched him absorb that. He had forgotten. Of course he had. He had spent 7 years thinking of her as decorative, and decorative things didn't have law degrees from Columbia. Then you understand this is just business, he said carefully. Business, Seraphina repeated. Like stealing $200 million from my trust fund is business? The color drained from Damien's face. There it was. The moment he realized she knew more than he thought. I don't know what you think you found, he started. Wire transfers. Dated and documented. Money moved from accounts you didn't know existed into your expansion fund. Seraphina's voice remained perfectly calm. Money you used to buy Celeste that apartment and those diamonds she was wearing tonight. Damien's expression hardened. The mask was slipping now, revealing something uglier underneath. That money was community property, he said. No, it wasn't. It was held in a trust established before our marriage, with very specific terms about how it could be accessed. She paused. Terms you violated. You're accusing me of theft? I'm stating facts. Facts. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. You want to talk about facts, Seraphina? Here's a fact. Everything I've built, I built myself. Every company, every deal, every success. You've just been... He stopped himself again. What? Say it. You've been along for the ride. The words should have hurt. A year ago, they would have destroyed her. But Seraphina just looked at him with something close to pity. Is that what you tell yourself? She asked quietly. It's the truth. The truth is that the first $1 million you raised came from a loan arranged by people you've never met. The truth is that every major investor you've landed had already been persuaded before you walked into the room. The truth is that your biggest competitor dropped out of the market 3 years ago because someone made them an offer they couldn't refuse. She stepped closer to him. The truth is that you have no idea how many times I saved you from yourself. Damien stared at her like she was a stranger. You're delusional, he said finally. Am I? Yes. You're upset because you saw me with Celeste, and now you're inventing some fantasy where you're secretly the power behind my success. His voice rose. You think I need you? You think any of this happened because of you? I know it did. Then prove it. The challenge came out sharp and fast. If you're so important, if you're so powerful, prove it. Walk away. Leave. See what happens without you. Seraphina smiled. It was the same smile she had seen in the mirror an hour ago, the one that didn't belong to Damien Cross's wife. Okay, she said softly. Damien blinked. What? I'll leave. You... He stopped, wrong-footed. This wasn't the script. She was supposed to back down now, apologize, cry maybe. Not agree. You'll what? I'll leave. I'll walk away. And then we'll both see what happens. For a moment, uncertainty flickered across his face. Then pride stomped it down. Fine, he said. Fine. Leave. See if I care. See if anything changes. See if you matter at all. I will. When? Tomorrow night, after your dinner. That stopped him. His eyes narrowed. What dinner? The one with your top investors. Top floor of the Cross building. The one you told me not to come to. How do you... I'll be there anyway. Like hell you will. You can't stop me, Damien. It's my building too. Or did you forget that my name is on the deed? His face went white. She saw him realize what she was saying. The Cross building wasn't just his. It had been purchased through a company where Seraphina held 51% ownership, another detail he had forgotten because he had stopped seeing her as anything other than furniture. If you show up tomorrow night, he started, his voice low and threatening. What? What will you do? Damien took a step toward her. For the first time in 7 years, Seraphina saw something dangerous flash across his face. Not violence. Damien was too civilized for physical violence. But the threat was there anyway, cold and calculated. I will destroy you, he said quietly. I will make sure you never work in this city again. I will tell everyone who will listen that you're unstable, vindictive, and delusional. I will bury you so deep you'll wish you had just stayed quiet and grateful for the life I gave you. Seraphina looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached up and unclasped her wedding ring. The diamond caught the light as she held it up between them. 3 carats, flawless clarity, purchased with money Damien didn't know came from her father's accounts. She set it carefully on the dresser. Good night, Damien, she said. Then she walked past him into the guest bedroom and locked the door. Behind it, she heard him standing in the hallway, breathing hard, trying to decide if this was real or just another argument that would blow over by morning. It wasn't. Seraphina sat on the edge of the guest bed and pulled out her phone. She turned it back on. Messages flooded in, 17 from Damien, all sent in the hour after she left the gala. 3 from Margaret Chen, 1 from a number she didn't recognize. She opened the unknown number first. Everything is ready. The dress will be delivered at noon. Carlo will pick you up at 6 p.m. Your father says to rest. Tomorrow, you go to war. Seraphina read it twice. Then she deleted it and turned the phone off again. She lay back on the bed, still wearing the necklace, and stared at the ceiling. Somewhere in the apartment, she heard Damien slam a door, then silence. She didn't sleep. Instead, she thought about tomorrow, about walking into that dinner wearing black instead of beige, about the look on Damien's face when he realized exactly who he had married, about the moment everything he thought he knew about his life shattered into pieces too small to put back together. She thought about her father, waiting in Brooklyn with an army of men who would burn Manhattan to the ground if she asked them to. She thought about 7 years of silence, and she thought about the sound her voice would make when she finally used it to destroy everything Damien Cross had ever built. Morning came gray and cold. Seraphina woke to the sound of the front door closing. She checked the time, 6:15 a.m. Damien leaving early for the office, probably to call an emergency meeting with his lawyers to figure out how to handle his suddenly non-compliant wife. Too late. She got up and showered, washing away the last traces of the woman she had pretended to be. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. The soft curls were gone, replaced by her hair pulled back severe and simple. No makeup except what made her look sharper, more dangerous. She dressed in black leggings and an oversized sweater. Comfortable. Forgettable. The last day anyone would ever overlook her. At noon exactly, the doorbell rang. Seraphina opened it to find a delivery man holding a garment bag and a large black box. He didn't make eye contact, just handed both items over and left without a word. Inside the garment bag was the dress. Seraphina laid it across the bed and stepped back to look at it properly. It was black. Not soft black. Not elegant black. War black. The fabric looked like it had been forged rather than sewn, structured, architectural, uncompromising. The neckline cut sharp and precise, the sleeves long and fitted. The skirt fell to the floor in a way that suggested armor more than fashion. It was the kind of dress a queen wore when she came to take back her kingdom. In the box was a pair of heels that added 4 inches of height and looked sharp enough to draw blood. And beneath them, wrapped in black silk, was a small handgun. Seraphina picked it up carefully. A Beretta 92 FS compact. Reliable. Her father's favorite. The weight of it in her hand felt familiar in a way that should have been disturbing, but instead felt like coming home. There was a note beneath the gun, just in case, though you won't need it, they will be terrified enough. V. She set the gun back in the box. Then she spent the rest of the day preparing. At 4 p.m., her phone buzzed. A message from Damien. "We need to talk before tonight. Come to the office." She ignored it. Another message 5 minutes later. "Seraphina, I'm serious. We need to handle this before it gets out of control." She deleted it. At 5 p.m., her phone rang. She let it go to voicemail. Then she listened to Damien's voice, tight with barely controlled anger, telling her that if she showed up tonight, she would regret it for the rest of her life. She deleted that too. At 5:30, she started getting ready. The dress fit perfectly. It transformed her into someone else entirely, someone who had always been there beneath the surface, waiting for permission to emerge. She added the necklace. The obsidian stones sat against her skin like a crown. The heels made her taller than Damien. She liked that. At 5:50, there was a knock at the door. Carlos stood in the hallway wearing a suit that concealed at least 2 weapons. Behind him, visible through the elevator doors, stood 12 men who looked like they ate fear for breakfast. "Principessa," Carlos said quietly. "It's time." Seraphina picked up a small black clutch. Inside it, her phone, her ID. Nothing else. She didn't need anything else. "Let's go," she said. She eat. The elevator ride down was silent. In the lobby, the doorman's eyes widened when he saw her. Not recognition. Something else. Instinctive fear wrapped in a smile. "Have a good evening, Mrs. Cross," he managed. She didn't correct him. Outside, 3 black SUVs waited. Carlo opened the door of the middle vehicle. Seraphina slid inside. Through the tinted windows, she watched Manhattan blur past, the city her husband thought he owned. He was wrong about that, too. The Cross building rose 90 stories into the sky, glass and steel reflecting the sunset like a blade. The lobby was empty. Damien had cleared it for his private dinner. No witnesses, no interruptions, just 20 of the most powerful investors in America, gathering to celebrate the man who had convinced them all he was a genius. Security stopped them at the elevators. Smite it. 2 guards in corporate uniforms, hands resting casually near their concealed weapons. They saw Seraphina first, recognized her, started to nod her through. Then they saw the 12 men behind her. "Ma'am," the first guard said carefully, "these gentlemen aren't on the list." "They are now," Seraphina said. "I'm going to need to call Mr. Cross." Carlo moved, not threatening, just a single step forward that made both guards' hands twitch toward their guns. He smiled, and it was the kind of smile that had ended arguments in darker places than this lobby. "The lady said they're on the list," Carlo said softly. The guards looked at each other. They were corporate security, trained to handle drunk executives and overeager journalists. They weren't trained for whatever energy Carlo and his men were bringing into this space. The first guard stepped aside. "90th floor," he said quietly. "I know," Seraphina said. The elevator ride up was silent except for the subtle hum of machinery. Seraphina watched the numbers climb. 70, 80, 85. Her heart should have been racing. It wasn't. She felt calm, clear. Every cell in her body aligned toward a single purpose. 90. The doors opened onto a private foyer. Beyond it, through floor-to-ceiling glass doors, she could see the dinner already in progress. A long table set with crystal and silver. 20 men in expensive suits talking and laughing over wine that cost more per bottle than most people made in a month. And at the head of the table, Damien. He was mid-sentence when he saw her. His words died in his throat. The entire table fell silent. 20 pairs of eyes turned toward the woman standing in the doorway, wearing war-black and obsidian, flanked by men who looked like they had walked out of a different century entirely. Seraphina stepped into the room. Her heels clicked against marble, sharp, measured, the sound of a countdown toward detonation. She walked the length of the table slowly. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. They just stared at her like she was a creature from mythology who had suddenly manifested in their perfectly controlled world. When she reached Damien, she stopped. He had gone pale. His hands gripped the armrests of his chair like he was trying to anchor himself to reality. "What are you doing here?" he said. Not a question, a demand. Seraphina smiled. "I was invited," she said softly. "No, you weren't." "I own 51% of this building, Damien. I don't need an invitation." Murmurs rippled around the table. She saw several men exchange glances. They knew her name, Mrs. Cross, the quiet wife, but they were starting to realize they didn't know anything else about her at all. "You need to leave," Damien said. His voice was low, controlled, but she could hear the panic underneath it. "Now." "I don't think so." "Seraphina, sit down, Damien." The command came out quiet but absolute, and to her satisfaction, he obeyed. Not because he wanted to, because somewhere in his lizard brain, some ancient instinct recognized the predator standing in front of him and decided that compliance was the safer option. Seraphina turned to face the table. 20 of the most powerful investors in America stared back at her. She recognized most of them. Richard Chen, who controlled a venture capital fund worth $12 billion. Thomas Vandenberg, whose family had been buying politicians since the 1800s. David Reeves, who ran the second-largest private equity firm in the country. And sitting 3 seats from Damien, looking like he had just seen a ghost, Jonathan Price, her father's man, placed at this table 2 years ago with a fake background and a real fortune, feeding information back to Brooklyn while Damien thought he was courting an independent investor. Jonathan's eyes met hers for just a fraction of a second. Then he looked away, his face carefully neutral. "Gentlemen," Seraphina said, her voice carrying easily through the room. "I apologize for the interruption, but there's something you all need to know before you invest another dollar in my husband's company." "Seraphina, stop!" Damien started to stand. Carlo appeared at his shoulder. Didn't touch him, didn't need to. Just stood there, a wall of quiet menace, and Damien sat back down. "Everything Damien has told you," Seraphina continued, "is a lie." The room erupted. Damien lunged to his feet, his face flushed with rage and fear. "You have no right!" "I have every right." Seraphina's voice cut through the noise like a knife. "I'm his wife. I'm his partner. And more importantly," she paused, letting the silence build, "I'm his primary creditor." That stopped them. Every man at the table went still. "What?" Richard Chen leaned forward. "What does that mean?" Seraphina reached into her clutch and pulled out a single flash drive. She set it on the table in front of her. "This contains documentation of every loan, every investment, every financial transaction that built Cross Global." She looked at Damien. His face had gone from pale to gray. "Care to guess how much of it came from you, darling?" He said nothing. "The answer is 8%. Maybe 9, if we're being generous." She picked up the flash drive and walked slowly around the table, letting each man see it. The rest came from shell companies, offshore accounts, and private trusts that all trace back to the same source. "Who?" Thomas Vandenberg demanded. Seraphina stopped walking. This was it. The moment she crossed the line from Damien's wife to her father's daughter. The moment she burned the bridge behind her and stepped into the role she was born for. She looked at Damien one last time, saw the man she had loved, the man she had protected, the man who had betrayed her so completely he didn't even understand what he had lost. "Me," she said simply. The room exploded into chaos. Investors started talking over each other, demanding explanations, verification, proof. Phones came out. Lawyers were called. But Seraphina just stood there, calm and still in the center of the storm. Damien slammed his hands on the table. "She's lying!" His voice cracked. "She's trying to sabotage—" "Oh, I have documentation," Seraphina said quietly. "Every wire transfer, every account number, every shell company, every single time I saved you from yourself." She looked around the table. "And more importantly, gentlemen, I have something else you should probably know." "What?" David Reeves asked, his voice tight. Seraphina smiled, and for the first time in 7 years she told the truth. "My father is Vittorio Moretti." The name landed like a bomb. For 3 full seconds, nobody breathed. Then Richard Chen stood up so fast his chair fell backward. His face had gone white as paper. "You're—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "Yes," Seraphina said simply. Around the table, she watched the realization spread like poison. They knew that name. Everyone in this room knew that name. You didn't operate at their level without understanding that there were powers in America that existed beyond the law. Powers that shaped markets and elections, and the futures of men who forgot to show proper respect. Vittorio Moretti was one of those powers, and she was his daughter. "Oh my God," someone whispered. Damien just stared at her. His face had gone beyond pale into something corpse-like. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. "Surprise," Seraphina said softly. Then the elevator doors opened behind her, and Vittorio Moretti walked into the room. He moved like a king inspecting territory he had owned all along but simply hadn't bothered to claim yet. Behind him came more men, 20, maybe 30, all wearing suits that concealed enough firepower to start a small war. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Every investor at the table understood what was happening now. This wasn't a business dinner anymore. This was something much older and more dangerous. This was a reckoning. Vittorio walked slowly to the head of the table. Damien scrambled out of the chair like it was on fire. Her father sat down calmly, adjusted his cufflinks, and looked around at the assembled men with the patient expression of a teacher addressing particularly slow students. "Gentlemen," he said quietly, "we need to talk about my son-in-law." His voice was soft, polite even. But everyone in the room heard the threat underneath it, and Seraphina, standing beside her father's chair, wearing the necklace of a queen, watched her husband's empire begin to crumble into dust. Vittorio Moretti didn't raise his voice. He never had to. "My daughter," he said, his eyes scanning the table with the casual attention of a man counting livestock, "has been very patient with you all, more patient than I would have been." He folded his hands on the table in front of him. "She spent 7 years protecting a man who didn't deserve protection, building an empire for someone too stupid to understand where the bricks came from." Damien stood frozen 3 feet from his own chair, his face a mask of shock and horror. His mouth worked soundlessly, trying to form words that wouldn't come. Seraphina watched him struggle, felt nothing. Richard Chen was the first to recover. He cleared his throat, his hand trembling slightly as he reached for his water glass. "Mr. Moretti," he said carefully, "I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding." Vittorio's voice remained pleasant, conversational. "You invested $40 million in Cross Global 3 years ago. Do you remember the terms?" Chen's face paled. Yes, of course. Then you remember that the deal almost fell through. Damien's projections didn't add up. His collateral was insufficient. You were going to walk away." Vittorio smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "Until someone convinced you otherwise." The investor said nothing. "That someone," Vittorio continued, "was one of my associates. He explained to you that it would be very beneficial to your other business interests if you reconsidered. And you did. Funny how that works." Around the table, men were going still. The kind of stillness that came from prey animals, realizing they were in the presence of something that could end them. Seraphina moved to stand beside her father's chair. From this position, she could see every face clearly. Watch the moment each man understood exactly how deep the deception went. Thomas Vandenberg leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting from shock to calculation. He was old money, 4th-generation wealth, the kind of man who thought himself untouchable. Let me understand this correctly, he said slowly. You're claiming that every major investment in Cross Global was coerced? Coerced is such an ugly word, Vittorio said mildly. I prefer encouraged, motivated, persuaded through strategic alignment of interests. That's extortion. That's business. Vittorio's smile widened fractionally. And before you start thinking about lawyers and federal investigations, you should know that I have documentation of every conversation, every meeting, every backroom deal that brought you to this table, including the ones that have nothing to do with my son-in-law. Vandenberg's face went gray. So here's what's going to happen, Vittorio continued, his voice still perfectly calm. You're going to sit quietly while my daughter explains exactly how much money Cross Global actually owes the Moretti family. And then you're going to decide whether you want to walk away from this mess voluntarily or whether you'd prefer we take a more aggressive approach to asset recovery. David Reeves slammed his palm on the table. You can't threaten us like this. We have rights. You have nothing. The words came from Seraphina, and the room went silent. She looked at Reeves with the same cold attention she might give an insect. You invested dirty money through clean channels. Every dollar you put into Cross Global can be traced back to tax shelters, fraudulent accounts, and offshore holdings that would make the IRS very interested in your entire portfolio. She paused. Do you really want to test whether your lawyers are better than my father's? Reeves closed his mouth. Damien finally found his voice. Came out strangled, desperate. This is insane. You're all insane. He looked around the table wildly. Don't listen to them. They can't prove any of this. They're bluffing. I'm not bluffing. Seraphina pulled out her phone and tapped the screen. The wall-mounted television behind Damien flickered to life, displaying a spreadsheet so detailed it would take hours to read completely. Every shell company, every wire transfer, every loan that kept Cross Global alive when it should have died. She looked at her husband. You want to know the truth, Damien? The truth is, you've never made a real decision in your entire life. Someone has always been there to catch you when you fell. I bet shit me mom. That's a lie. Marcus Chen. She highlighted a name on the screen. Your first investor. You thought you impressed him with your pitch, but he invested because my father owned the building where his mistress lived, and he understood what would happen if he said no. Damien's face twisted. No, Stephanie Liu, your second major backer. She came on board after someone made her competitor's supply chain mysteriously collapse. Seraphina highlighted another name. Gregory Haynes. Invested after his daughter's DUI charge disappeared from the system. Another name. Patricia Wolf. Her vote on your board came 3 days after her ex-husband dropped his custody suit. She went down the list methodically, clinically, destroying every illusion Damien had built about his own competence. With each name, his face lost more color. His breathing became shallower. Stop, he whispered. She didn't stop. And then there's your biggest triumph, the Meridian deal, $600 million. The deal that made you a billionaire. Seraphina tapped the screen and a new document appeared. You thought you won the bidding war through superior strategy, but your main competitor withdrew after someone burned down his manufacturing facility in Singapore. No casualties, just enough damage to make him reconsider his priorities. The room was dead silent. You didn't build this empire, Damien. I did. My father did. An entire invisible network of power that you never even knew existed. Seraphina's voice remained perfectly steady. You were just the face we put on the front of it. Damien stumbled backward until he hit the window. His hands pressed against the glass behind him like he was trying to push through it and escape. Why? The word came out broken. If you had all this power, why did you need me? For the first time that night, Seraphina felt something close to pain. Because I loved you, she said softly. I thought if I gave you everything you wanted, if I made you successful and powerful and untouchable, you would see me, really see me. Not as Vittorio Moretti's daughter, but as Seraphina. Just Seraphina. I did see you. You saw furniture. You saw an accessory. Something simple and classic that made you look good at parties. Her voice hardened. You saw what you wanted to see because it was easier than seeing the truth. Damien's legs gave out. He slid down the window until he was sitting on the floor, his expensive suit crumpling around him. He looked small suddenly, diminished. I loved you too, he said. I did. You loved what I could give you. There's a difference. Jonathan Price cleared his throat. All eyes turned to him. He looked at Seraphina with an expression that was almost apologetic. "Ms. Moretti," he said carefully, using her real name for the first time in public. "There's something else these gentlemen should know." Seraphina frowned. "What?" "The federal investigation." Her stomach dropped. "What federal investigation?" Jonathan's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. A warning, maybe. Or regret. "The one that's been building against Cross Global for the past 8 months. Wire fraud, money laundering, tax evasion." He pulled out his own phone and set it on the table. "The one I've been feeding information to." The temperature in the room plummeted. Seraphina stared at him. "You're supposed to be my father's man." "I am your father's man." Jonathan's voice remained steady. "Which is why I'm telling you this now instead of letting you find out when the FBI shows up." Vittorio leaned forward slightly. His expression hadn't changed, but the air around him went cold and sharp. "Explain," he said quietly. "6 months ago, the Justice Department approached me. They knew I was close to Cross. They offered me immunity in exchange for testimony about the Moretti family's involvement in corporate fraud." Jonathan looked directly at Vittorio. "I refused, obviously. But I've been playing both sides since then, feeding them information that can't touch you while building a case against Damien. Without authorization. Yes. Why?" Jonathan hesitated. Then he looked at Seraphina, because she deserved an exit that didn't make her a criminal. If the Moretti name gets attached to Cross Global's collapse, the federal investigation doesn't stop with Damien. It comes for her, for you, for everyone. He paused. This way, Damien goes down clean, a corrupt CEO who fooled everyone, including his wife. The family stays protected. Seraphina felt the room tilt slightly. "How long until they move?" 48 hours, maybe less. And Damien's arrest? Inevitable. The evidence is airtight. He's been signing off on fraudulent reports for years. Once the investigation goes public, Cross Global stock crashes, his assets get frozen, and he spends the next decade fighting criminal charges. Jonathan's expression was carefully neutral. "It's already done. This dinner, this confrontation, it doesn't change what's coming." Damien looked up from the floor, his eyes wide with fresh horror. "You set me up, all of you. This whole thing was a setup." "No." Seraphina's voice came out harder than she intended. "You set yourself up the moment you started stealing from accounts you thought were hidden. The moment you signed fraudulent documents. The moment you decided the rules didn't apply to you." She looked at Jonathan. "What about tonight? What happens when the feds find out about this meeting?" "They won't. Not from me." He glanced at the other investors. "And I suspect nobody else at this table wants to explain to federal agents why they were having a private dinner with Vittorio Moretti." Around the table, heads shook quickly. Nobody wanted that conversation. Richard Chen stood abruptly. "I'm leaving." "Sit down," Vittorio said mildly. Chen sat. "You'll leave when I say you can leave. Right now, we're going to discuss severance terms." Vittorio looked around the table. "Each of you invested in Cross Global knowing full well the money came from questionable sources. You didn't ask hard questions because you didn't want hard answers. That was a choice. Now you get to live with the consequences." "What do you want?" Thomas Vandenberg asked, his voice tight. "Your signatures." Seraphina pulled another document from her clutch and set it on the table. "Transfer agreements. You sell your shares in Cross Global back to me for $1 each. In exchange, your names stay out of the federal investigation." "That's robbery." "That's survival." Seraphina's voice cut through the protests. "In 48 hours, those shares will be worth nothing anyway. This way, you walk away clean. Or you can refuse, and I make sure every federal agent involved in this case knows exactly how deep your connections to organized crime actually go." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. One by one, the investors reached for their pens. Seraphina watched them sign away billions in equity for less than the cost of a cup of coffee. Watched them try to salvage something from the wreckage of their own greed. When the last signature dried on the page, she gathered the documents and handed them to Carlo. "You're free to go," she said. The exodus was immediate. 20 men scrambled for the elevator like the room was on fire. Within 90 seconds, the dining room was empty except for Seraphina, Vittorio, Carlo, and Damien still crumpled on the floor. Seraphina stood at the window, looking out over Manhattan. Behind her reflection, she could see Damien's broken form, could see her father watching her with patient eyes. "You should have told me about the federal investigation," she said quietly. "I didn't know," Vittorio replied. "Jonathan acted on his own." "Did he?" "Yes." Her father stood and came to stand beside her. "Though I would have made the same choice if I had known. He's right. This way you stay clean." "I don't feel clean." "You will, eventually." Seraphina turned to look at Damien. He was staring at nothing, his mind visibly struggling to process the magnitude of his collapse. 7 years of success evaporating in a single night. "What happens to him?" she asked. "Prison, eventually. After the trial, the appeals, the desperate attempts to salvage something." Vittorio's voice held no sympathy. "He'll probably serve 8 to 12 years if his lawyers are good, more if they're not." "And Celeste?" "Already on a plane to Paris. She cleaned out their shared accounts this afternoon and disappeared." Vittorio smiled slightly. "Rats always know when to abandon the ship." Damien made a sound. Not quite a sob. Something worse. The sound of a man realizing he had lost everything, including the mistress he thought loved him. Seraphina felt nothing. That should have bothered her, the absence of feeling. But it didn't. She walked over to where Damien sat and crouched down so they were eye level. Up close, she could see the broken blood vessels in his eyes, the sweat on his forehead, the tremor in his hands. "I would have given you everything," she said softly. "All of this. The empire, the power, the protection. I would have stood beside you and helped you build something real, something that lasted." She paused. "All you had to do was see me, love me, choose me." "I did," he started. "You didn't. You chose yourself, every single time, and now you get to live with that choice." She stood. Behind her, Carlo moved forward with 2 of his men. They lifted Damien to his feet with the impersonal efficiency of people moving furniture. "Where are you taking him?" Seraphina asked. "Home," Carlo said. "He'll be more comfortable there while he waits for the inevitable." They walked Damien to the elevator. He didn't fight, didn't resist, just moved like a puppet with cut strings, all his animation gone. The elevator doors closed on his face, and then Seraphina was alone with her father. Vittorio poured himself a glass of wine from the abandoned dinner table. He offered one to Seraphina. She shook her head. "You should celebrate," he said. "Should I?" "You just took control of a multi-billion-dollar empire. You exposed your husband's fraud. You protected the family from federal scrutiny. You won." He sipped the wine. "Most people would be celebrating." "I don't feel like I won." "What do you feel?" Seraphina looked down at her hands. The obsidian necklace felt heavy around her throat. The dress that had felt like armor an hour ago now felt like a costume. "Empty," she said finally. Vittorio nodded slowly. "That's normal." "Is it?" Revenge always feels hollow afterward. You spend so long imagining the moment, planning it, perfecting it. And then it happens and you realize it doesn't fix anything, doesn't make you whole, doesn't bring back what you lost. He set down his wine glass. But it does give you power. And power, used correctly, is better than happiness. "I don't want power." "Yes, you do. You just don't know it yet." Her father came to stand beside her at the window. "Look at this city, Seraphina. Every light is someone's life, someone's dream, someone's empire. Most of them will fail. Most of them will be forgotten. But a few, a very few, will build something that lasts." He paused. "You just became one of them. The question is what you do with it." Seraphina looked at him. Really looked. At the lines around his eyes, the gray in his hair, the weight of decades sitting on his shoulders. "How do you live with it?" she asked. "The choices you've made, the things you've done." "By remembering why I made them, by protecting the people who matter, by building something bigger than myself." He turned to face her fully. "You think I'm a monster. Maybe I am. But I'm a monster who kept my family safe, my people employed, my empire intact. That matters more than being loved by people who don't understand the price of power." "I love Damien," I know. And I destroyed him anyway. Yes. Doesn't that make me a monster too? Vittorio smiled, sad and knowing. No, figlia mia, it makes you my daughter. The words landed like stones. Seraphina turned back to the window. Below them, Manhattan glittered and pulsed with life. Somewhere down there, Damien was probably sitting in their penthouse trying to figure out how his world had collapsed so completely. Somewhere down there, Celeste was counting money in a first-class seat to Europe. Somewhere down there, 20 investors were calling their lawyers and praying they could escape the wreckage. And up here, Seraphina stood wearing her mother's necklace and her father's legacy, feeling the weight of both pressing down on her chest like drowning. Her phone buzzed. She pulled it out. A message from a number she didn't recognize. You should know something. Before this goes any further, before you decide what comes next. There's a piece you're missing. J.J. Jonathan Price. She showed the message to her father. His expression darkened. Call him, Vittorio said. Seraphina dialed. Jonathan answered on the first ring. You should come to the safe house, he said without preamble. There's someone you need to talk to. Who? Just come, alone. He paused. Trust me. You'll want to hear this before you make any final decisions about Damien. The line went dead. Seraphina looked at her father. He wants me to come alone. Then you take Carlo and 6 men. He said alone. I don't care what he said. Jonathan has been playing both sides of this game. You don't go anywhere without protection until we understand exactly whose side he's really on. Seraphina wanted to argue, wanted to prove she didn't need her father's protection anymore. But the truth was, she had no idea what she was walking into, and pride had already cost her too much. Fine, she said, but Carlo stays in the car. I go in alone. Vittorio didn't look happy, but he nodded. 20 minutes later, Seraphina was in the back of an SUV heading downtown. Carlo drove in silence while the city blurred past the windows. They crossed into a neighborhood that didn't exist on tourist maps. Industrial buildings, empty lots, the kind of area where questions weren't asked and answers weren't given. The safe house was a converted warehouse, anonymous and dark. Carlo parked half a block away. I don't like this, he said. I know. If you're not out in 20 minutes, I'm coming in. Seraphina nodded and stepped out of the car. The warehouse door was unlocked. She pushed through into darkness, her hand instinctively moving to the clutch where the Beretta waited. The space inside was vast and empty except for a single light burning in the far corner. Jonathan stood beneath it, but he wasn't alone. Seraphina's breath caught. Sitting in a chair beside him, looking pale and terrified and very much alive, was someone who wasn't supposed to exist. A woman. Young. Mid-20s, dark hair, green eyes that looked exactly like Damien's eyes. Hello, Seraphina, Jonathan said quietly. I'd like you to meet someone. This is Mafia Cross. He paused, and the next words came out carefully measured. Damien's daughter. The world stopped. Seraphina stared at the girl, at the slope of her nose, the shape of her jaw, the unmistakable genetic echo of the man she had just destroyed. That's impossible, she whispered. Damien doesn't have children. Yes, he does. Jonathan's voice was gentle, which somehow made it worse. From a relationship before he met you, he's been paying child support quietly for 8 years. The mother signed an NDA. Maya was never supposed to be public knowledge. The girl looked at Seraphina with an expression caught between fear and defiance. He's my father, she said, her voice shaking. And you just ruined his life. Seraphina couldn't breathe. The room tilted sideways. All the certainty she had felt an hour ago evaporated like smoke. Why are you showing me this? She asked Jonathan. Because the federal investigation doesn't just destroy Damien. It destroys everyone connected to him. His assets get frozen. His accounts seized. Everything tied to Cross Global becomes evidence. Jonathan looked at Maya. Including the trust fund he set up for his daughter's education. Including the medical expenses he's been paying for her mother's cancer treatment. Seraphina felt sick. How long have you known? She managed. 6 months, since I started cooperating with the feds. Jonathan's expression was unreadable. I thought you should know what collateral damage looks like before you decide how far you want to push this. Maya stood abruptly. I don't want his money if it's dirty. I don't want anything from him if he's a criminal. But my mom, her voice cracked. My mom is sick. She needs treatment. We don't have anything else. Seraphina looked at this girl, this stranger, this living proof that Damien had lied about one more thing, that even his claim of childlessness had been a performance, but none of that was Maya's fault. How much does the treatment cost? Seraphina heard herself ask. 200,000, maybe more. The doctors aren't sure yet. $200,000. An amount that meant nothing to Seraphina's accounts, but everything to this girl watching her father's empire collapse. If I help you, Seraphina said slowly, if I make sure your mother gets treatment and you can finish school, what do I get in return? Maya looked confused. I don't have anything to give you. Yes, you do. Seraphina stepped closer. I need to know everything Damien told you about me. Every conversation, every time he mentioned his wife, every complaint, every lie, every moment when he made me sound like the villain in his story. The girl's face crumpled slightly. He never said you were… Tell me the truth. Maya took a shaky breath. He said you were cold, distant, that you married him for his money and status, that you didn't understand him or support his dreams. She looked at the floor. He made it sound like you were the reason he was unhappy. There it was. Even with his secret daughter, even in his hidden life, Damien had been building a narrative where Seraphina was the problem, where everything wrong in his world was somehow her fault. She wanted to scream, wanted to rage, wanted to burn everything down until there was nothing left but ash. Instead, she pulled out her phone and transferred money. A lot of money. More than Maya's mother would need, more than was reasonable or fair. That's for the medical bills, she said, and tuition, and anything else you need. Maya stared at her phone as the notification came through. Her eyes went wide. I don't understand. Why would you… Because you're innocent. Because your mother is innocent. Because destroying Damien doesn't mean destroying everyone he ever touched. Seraphina looked at Jonathan. Make sure the trust fund gets restructured under a different name before the assets freeze. Something that can't be traced back to Cross Global. Already done, he said quietly. Good. She turned back to Maya. Your father made choices. Terrible choices. He's going to pay for them. But you don't have to. Do you understand? The girl nodded, tears streaming down her face. Thank you, she whispered. Seraphina left before she could change her mind. Outside, the night air hit her like a slap. She walked back to the SUV on legs that felt disconnected from her body. Carlo took one look at her face and didn't ask questions, just drove. They were halfway back to Manhattan when Seraphina's phone rang. Unknown number. She answered. Ms. Moretti. A woman's voice, professional, cold. This is Special Agent Rebecca Torres with the FBI. I need you to come in for questioning regarding your husband's business practices. Seraphina closed her eyes. When? Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., Federal Plaza. A pause. Don't make us come looking for you. The line went dead. Seraphina sat in the dark car, watching the city lights blur past, and felt the full weight of what she had set in motion come crashing down. She had destroyed Damien. She had taken control of his empire. She had protected her father's interests. But in doing so, she had painted a target on her own back. The federal investigation wasn't going to stop with Damien. They were going to dig. They were going to find connections. They were going to discover things about the Moretti family that had stayed buried for decades, and they were going to use her to do it. Carlo, she said quietly. Yes, Principessa? Call my father. Tell him we have a problem. What kind of problem? Seraphina looked at her reflection in the window. At the woman in the war-black dress wearing a queen's necklace and a target she couldn't see. The kind that doesn't have an easy solution. The SUV drove on through the darkness, carrying Seraphina toward a reckoning she hadn't planned for. And somewhere behind them, in a warehouse that didn't officially exist, a girl named Maya Cross stared at a phone screen showing more money than she had ever seen and wondered what kind of monster her father had married. The answer, Seraphina thought grimly, was that she wasn't a monster at all. She was something far more dangerous. She was a woman who had finally learned to fight back. And now she had to figure out how to survive the aftermath. Seraphina didn't sleep that night. She sat in the penthouse living room watching the sun rise over Manhattan, still wearing the black dress, the obsidian necklace cold against her skin. Her phone sat on the glass table in front of her, silent now, but the weight of that call from Special Agent Torres pressed down on her chest like a physical thing. 9 a.m., Federal Plaza, 6 hours away. Behind her, she heard footsteps. Carlo appeared in the doorway, his face drawn with exhaustion. He had been awake all night too, coordinating with Vittorio's people, shoring up defenses, preparing for the storm. "Your father wants to see you," he said quietly. "When?" "Now." Seraphina stood. Every muscle in her body ached. The dress that had felt like armor last night now felt like a prison. She wanted to tear it off, burn it, erase every trace of the woman who had walked into that dinner thinking she had already won. The drive to Brooklyn happened in silence. Dawn turned the warehouses orange and gold. Industrial decay transformed briefly into something almost beautiful. Seraphina watched it pass without really seeing it. Her mind was already at Federal Plaza, in a windowless interrogation room, facing questions she didn't know how to answer. Vittorio was waiting in the same underground office, but this time he wasn't alone. 3 men sat around his desk. Older, harder, their faces carved from decades of violence and survival. Seraphina recognized one of them, Angelo Russo, her father's oldest associate, a man who had been making problems disappear since before she was born. They all stood when she entered. "Sit," Vittorio said. She sat. Her father looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he slid a folder across the desk. "The FBI has been building a case against Cross Global for 8 months. Jonathan wasn't lying about that." Vittorio opened the folder. Inside were photographs, documents, surveillance logs. But what he didn't tell you is that they've also been building a parallel investigation. Into us. Seraphina's stomach dropped. "How long?" 2 years. Maybe longer. He tapped one of the photographs. It showed her having lunch with Damien 3 years ago before everything fell apart. "They've been watching you, trying to establish a connection between Cross Global's success and Moretti family involvement. They can't prove anything. They don't need to prove anything for a grand jury indictment. They just need enough smoke to justify digging deeper." Angelo leaned forward, his voice rough as gravel. "And right now, Seraphina, you're the smoke." She felt the walls closing in. "What do they have?" Vittorio flipped through the documents. "Wire transfers between shell companies registered in your name and cross-global accounts. Meetings between you and known Moretti associates. Phone records showing calls between you and Jonathan Price during periods when he was actively feeding information to the FBI." He paused. "And testimony from Damien." The room went silent. "What?" Seraphina's voice came out barely above a whisper. "Damien's lawyers approached the Justice Department this morning, 3 hours ago." Vittorio's expression was cold as January. "He's offering to cooperate. Full disclosure of Cross Global's financial structure in exchange for a reduced sentence." "Can't. He doesn't know anything about... He knows you set up the shell companies. He knows you arranged meetings with investors. He knows you had access to information you shouldn't have had." Angelo's voice cut through her denial like a knife. "He doesn't need to know about your father's involvement to make the FBI very interested in how a woman with no business experience managed to orchestrate billions in investments." Seraphina felt her chest tighten. Every breath took effort. "So what happens at 9 a.m.? They ask you questions. You refuse to answer. They pressure you, threaten you with obstruction charges." Vittorio stood and walked to the window overlooking the waterfront. "Eventually they offer you a deal. Immunity in exchange for testimony against your father." "I would never—" "I know." He said it with absolute certainty. "But they don't. They think you're Damien's wife. A civilian caught up in something she didn't understand. They think they can scare you into cooperating. They're wrong." "Yes, but proving that means going to prison." Vittorio turned to face her. "Federal conspiracy charges, racketeering, money laundering, wire fraud. You're looking at 20 years minimum if they decide to make an example of you." The number landed like a bomb. 20 years. She would be almost 50 when she got out. Her father would be dead. The empire would belong to someone else. Everything she had sacrificed, everything she had become, would mean nothing. "There has to be another option," she said. "There is." Angelo pulled out his own phone and set it on the table. On the screen was a photograph of a private jet. You disappear. Tonight. We have contacts in countries without extradition treaties. You could be in Buenos Aires by morning, Hong Kong by tomorrow night, gone before the FBI even realizes you're not coming in. Seraphina stared at the plane, at the escape hatch being offered to her. And spend the rest of my life running? Better than spending it in a cell. No. She said it firmly. I didn't come this far to run away like a coward. Then what do you want to do? Vittorio asked quietly. Seraphina looked at her father, at the men surrounding him, at the legacy she had been born into and tried so hard to escape. I want to fight. Against the federal government, against everyone. She stood. Damien wants to testify? Let him. I'll make sure everything he says sounds like the desperate lies of a man trying to save himself. How? By controlling the narrative. Seraphina's mind was already working, pieces clicking into place. The FBI thinks I'm a victim. Damien's innocent wife. So I play that role perfectly. I walk into Federal Plaza at 9 a.m. I answer their questions, and I make them believe I had no idea what my husband was really doing. Angelo shook his head. You can't lie to federal agents. That's a felony. I'm not going to lie. I'm going to tell them the truth. She looked at each man in turn. Just not all of it. Vittorio studied her face. She could see him calculating, measuring the risk against the potential gain. If you do this, he said slowly, you can't make a single mistake. One contradiction, one slip, one moment where they see through the performance, and you're done. I know. And you'll be doing it without protection. We can't have lawyers present without making you look guilty. No Moretti associates in the building, no safety net. I know that too. They will try to break you, Seraphina. That's what they do. They'll isolate you, exhaust you, use every psychological trick they have to make you crack. Let them try. Her voice was steel. I've spent 7 years pretending to be someone I'm not. I'm very good at it. Silence fell over the room. Then Vittorio smiled, slow and proud and dangerous. You really are my daughter, he said softly. At 8:30 a.m., Seraphina stood outside Federal Plaza wearing a different costume. She had changed out of the war-black dress into something softer, a cream-colored suit, minimal jewelry. Her hair down and loose. She looked like exactly what she needed to look like, a wealthy woman caught up in her husband's crimes, confused and frightened and desperately seeking answers. Carlo had dropped her off 3 blocks away. She walked the rest of the distance alone, her heels clicking against sidewalks still wet from overnight rain. News vans were already setting up outside the building. Someone had leaked that Damien Cross's wife was coming in for questioning. Cameras turned toward her. Seraphina kept her head down, one hand clutching her purse, the perfect image of a woman who didn't want to be seen. Inside, a young agent met her at security. Professional, polite. He led her through checkpoints and metal detectors, up an elevator that smelled like fear and industrial cleaner, down a hallway lined with doors that all looked the same. He opened one. Ms. Cross, if you'll wait here, please. The room was exactly what she expected. Gray walls, metal table, chairs bolted to the floor, a mirror that was definitely one-way glass. She had seen rooms like this before, back when her father brought her to meetings she wasn't supposed to attend, teaching her what the other side looked like. She sat down and folded her hands in her lap, and waited. 20 minutes passed, then 30. A classic intimidation tactic. Make the subject sit alone, let anxiety build, soften them up before the questions even started. Seraphina sat perfectly still and thought about nothing. At 9:45, the door opened. 2 agents entered. The woman was tall, black, mid-40s with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Her ID badge read Special Agent Rebecca Torres. The man was older, white, his suit worn at the elbows. Agent Marcus Webb. They sat across from her. Torres set a file folder on the table but didn't open it. Webb pulled out a digital recorder and pressed record. Interview with Seraphina Cross, May 7th, 9:47 a.m. Torres's voice was professionally neutral. Ms. Cross, thank you for coming in voluntarily. Of course. Seraphina's voice came out small, uncertain. I want to help however I can. We appreciate that. Torres opened the folder. Inside were documents Seraphina recognized. bank statements, wire transfers, corporate filings. I'm going to ask you some questions about your husband's business practices. If at any time you feel you need a lawyer present, you're free to request one. I don't need a lawyer. I haven't done anything wrong. Nobody's saying you have. Webb's voice was gentler, good cop to Torres's bad cop. We just need to understand how Cross Global operated. I'll tell you anything I know, but I'm not sure how much help I'll be. Damien didn't really involve me in business decisions. Torres's eyebrow lifted slightly. No, he said it was too complicated, too stressful. He wanted to protect me from that world. Seraphina looked down at her hands. I trusted him. But you set up several shell companies used by Cross Global, is that correct? Yes, Damien asked me to. He said it was for tax purposes. And you didn't question that? Should I have? Seraphina looked up, letting confusion and hurt show on her face. I thought wives were supposed to support their husbands. She watched Torres absorb that, saw the agent's expression shift slightly, not sympathy exactly, but recognition. The old story, powerful man, trusting wife, betrayal. Did you know the money flowing through those companies came from questionable sources? What sources? Offshore accounts, foreign investors with connections to organized crime. Seraphina's eyes widened. No, I had no idea. Damien told me they were legitimate business partners. You never asked questions? I did ask. Once. She paused as if the memory was painful. He got angry, told me I was being paranoid. Said if I didn't trust him, maybe we shouldn't be married. She looked directly at Torres. I didn't ask again. The agents exchanged glances. Webb leaned forward. Ms. Cross, we have evidence suggesting you attended meetings with several of your husband's investors. Dinners, private conversations. What was discussed at those meetings? Usually nothing interesting. Business talk I didn't really understand. I was there to smile and make small talk with the wives. Seraphina's voice remained soft. Damien liked having me there. He said I made him look stable, trustworthy. Did you ever hear your husband discuss illegal activities? No, never. What about your father? The question hung in the air like a knife. Seraphina let her face go blank, confused. My father? Vittorio Moretti. Torres said the name carefully, watching for reaction. You're his daughter, correct? I haven't spoken to my father in 7 years. Why not? Because he's a criminal, Seraphina said it flatly. I left that world when I married Damien. I wanted a clean life, a normal life. She paused. I guess I chose the wrong man for that. Torres studied her face. Your father never contacted you during your marriage? Once, maybe 5 years ago. He called to wish me happy birthday. I hung up on him. And he didn't try again? No, he understood. I made my choice. Seraphina looked down. At least I thought I did. What does that mean? It means I spent 7 years trying to be someone I'm not, trying to escape my family's legacy. And then I married a man who turned out to be worse than any of them. Her voice cracked slightly. Perfect. At least my father never pretended to love me. The room went quiet. Webb cleared his throat. Ms. Cross, your husband is claiming you were the mastermind behind Cross Global's financial structure, that you arranged the investments, set up the shell companies, orchestrated the entire operation. Seraphina looked up sharply, let shock and hurt flash across her face. That's a lie. Is it? Yes. Damien is trying to blame me for his crimes because he thinks I'm an easy target, because I'm Vittorio Moretti's daughter. She stood abruptly, her hands shaking. You want to know the truth? The truth is I loved my husband. I trusted him. I did everything he asked without question because I thought we were building a life together. And now he's throwing me under the bus to save himself. Torres raised a hand. Ms. Cross, please sit down. Why? So you can accuse me of crimes I didn't commit? So you can turn me into my father's daughter instead of Damien's wife? Nobody's accusing you of anything. Yes, you are. You've been accusing me since I walked in this room. Seraphina's voice rose. You think because I'm a Moretti I must be guilty. You think I can't possibly be just a woman who made the mistake of loving the wrong man. That's not what we think. Oh, Then what do you think, Agent Torres? Tell me. Because right now it feels like you've already decided I'm guilty and you're just looking for evidence to match your conclusion. Silence. Torres and Webb exchanged another glance. This one lasted longer. We're going to take a short break, Torres said finally. Can we get you some water? Coffee? I want to go home. You're free to leave any time, but we'd appreciate if you'd answer a few more questions first. Seraphina sat back down slowly, made it look like surrender, like exhaustion. Fine, but I want this on record. She looked directly at the camera she knew was behind the mirror. I had no knowledge of my husband's illegal activities. I was not involved in any criminal conspiracy, and I have not been in contact with my father or his organization for 7 years. She paused. If Damien is claiming otherwise, he's lying to save himself. Torres made a note. Noted. Now, let's talk about the night of the Cross Foundation Gala. The interrogation continued for another 3 hours. They asked about investments, meetings, phone calls, wire transfers. Every question designed to catch her in a contradiction, to find the crack in her story where the truth would spill out. Seraphina answered each one carefully, consistently, playing the role so perfectly she almost believed it herself. The trusting wife, the victim, the woman who had loved the wrong man and paid the price. At 1 p.m., Torres finally closed her folder. That's all for now, Ms. Cross. We may have follow-up questions as the investigation continues. Am I under arrest? No, you're free to go. Seraphina stood. Her legs felt unsteady, but she didn't let it show. Agent Torres? Yes? When you arrest my husband, make sure he understands something. Seraphina's voice was quiet, but absolutely clear. Whatever he thinks he's doing by blaming me, it won't work. The truth always comes out eventually. She left before Torres could respond. Outside, the news cameras swarmed. Reporters shouted questions, microphones thrust toward her face. Seraphina kept her head down and pushed through, not answering, not looking up. The perfect image of a woman who just wanted to disappear. A black SUV pulled up to the curb. Carlo. She climbed inside and the door closed, muffling the chaos outside. How did it go? He asked. I don't know yet. The SUV pulled into traffic. Seraphina leaned her head back against the seat and closed her eyes. Every muscle in her body felt like wire pulled too tight. Her phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. You did well, but they're not done with you. Torres doesn't believe you. She's going to dig deeper. Watch your back. J. Jonathan. Seraphina deleted the message and turned off her phone. They drove back to Manhattan in silence. But when they reached the bridge, Carlo didn't take the exit toward the penthouse. He kept driving. Where are we going? Seraphina asked. Your father wants to see you. Says it's urgent. 20 minutes later, they were back in the underground office. But this time, Vittorio wasn't alone. Damien sat in a chair across from the desk, his hands zip-tied behind his back, his face bruised and swollen. Blood crusted beneath his nose. One eye had swollen shut. Seraphina stopped in the doorway. Papa, what did you do? I invited your husband for a conversation. Vittorio's voice was calm, pleasant even. We had some things to discuss. Damien looked up at her. His good eye was wild with terror. Seraphina, please. Tell them I didn't mean it. Tell them. Carlo hit him. Not hard, just enough to shut him up. Damien called the FBI this morning, Vittorio said, looking at his daughter. Told them he wanted to testify. Told them you were the criminal mastermind. Told them every lie he could think of to save himself. He walked around the desk slowly. So I thought we should clarify a few things before he makes that testimony official. You can't do this, Seraphina said quietly. Can I? If he disappears, the FBI will know. They'll come after us with everything they have. Who said anything about him disappearing? Vittorio smiled. He's going to walk out of here, eventually, once we've reached an understanding. Damien was shaking. I'll tell them everything. You can't stop me. You'll tell them nothing. Vittorio's voice dropped to a whisper. Because if you do, I will make sure your daughter spends the rest of her life knowing exactly what kind of man her father was. Damien went white. You wouldn't. I have photographs, Damien, of you and Celeste, of you with other women, of you stealing money from accounts that were supposed to protect your daughter's future. Vittorio leaned down until they were eye level. I will make sure Maya Cross understands that every good thing in her life exists because her father was willing to betray the only person who ever really loved him. She's a child. She's 24, old enough to understand betrayal. Vittorio straightened. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell the FBI you made a mistake, that you were confused and desperate and said things that weren't true. You're going to recant your testimony. And if I don't? Then Maya's mother doesn't get her next round of treatment. The money dries up, the trust fund disappears, and your daughter learns exactly what you are. Damien's face crumpled, tears mixed with blood running down his cheeks. You're a monster, he whispered. Yes, but I'm a monster who keeps his promises. Betray my daughter again, and you'll see exactly how monstrous I can be. Seraphina watched this happen with a strange detachment. Part of her wanted to stop it, wanted to tell her father this was too far, that threatening Maya was a line they shouldn't cross. But another part of her, the part that had sat in Federal Plaza for 3 hours being interrogated, the part that remembered Damien parading Celeste at the gala, the part that knew he would sacrifice anyone to save himself, that part felt nothing but cold satisfaction. Cut him loose, Vittorio said to Carlo. The zip ties came off. Damien slumped forward, rubbing his wrists. Get out of my sight, Vittorio said. And remember, one word to the FBI about anything other than your own crimes, and your daughter pays the price. Carlo and 2 other men hauled Damien to his feet. He looked at Seraphina one last time. I loved you, he said. His voice was broken, empty. No, she replied. You loved what I could give you. You never loved me. They took him away. The door closed. Seraphina and her father were alone. You shouldn't have threatened Maya, she said quietly. I didn't threaten her. I threatened to tell her the truth. There's a difference. Is there? Yes. Vittorio poured himself a drink. The truth is that Damien is a coward who stole money meant for his daughter's care. I didn't make that true. I just promised to make it public. Seraphina sat down heavily. The adrenaline that had carried her through the interrogation was fading, leaving exhaustion in its wake. What happens now? Now we wait. Damien recants his testimony within 24 hours or we follow through on the threat. The FBI continues investigating, but without his cooperation, their case falls apart. You maintain your innocence. Eventually, they either charge you or they don't. And if they charge me, then we deal with it. Vittorio sat across from her. But I don't think they will. Torres is smart, but she has nothing but circumstantial evidence and the word of a desperate man. She'll push, she'll dig, but eventually she'll move on to cases she can actually prove. Seraphina wanted to believe that, wanted to think this was almost over, but something in her chest told her the worst was still coming. Her phone buzzed. She turned it back on. 3 missed calls from an unknown number, 1 voicemail. She listened to it. Special Agent Torres's voice filled her ear. Miss Cross, this is Agent Torres. We need you to come back in. We've uncovered some new evidence that contradicts your earlier statement. Please contact me immediately. The message ended. Seraphina looked at her father. They found something. What? I don't know, but they want me to come back. Vittorio's expression darkened. Don't go. Lawyer up. Refuse to answer any more questions. If I do that, I look guilty. If you go back without protection, you're vulnerable. I'm already vulnerable, Papa. Have been since the moment I walked into Federal Plaza. Seraphina stood. But if I run now, if I hide behind lawyers and the Fifth Amendment, they'll know I was lying. They'll know I'm guilty. And then they won't stop until they prove it. Seraphina, I have to go back. I have to see what they found. And I have to convince them one more time that I'm just Damien's wife. Her father looked at her for a long moment. She could see the calculation in his eyes, the risk assessment, the weighing of her life against the empire. Finally, he nodded. Then you go. But this time, you don't go alone. He pulled out his phone. I'm calling our best lawyer, criminal defense, federal cases. He'll meet you there. Torres will see that as an admission of guilt. I don't care. You're not walking into that building without protection again. Seraphina wanted to argue, but the truth was, she was terrified. Whatever evidence Torres had found, it was enough to call her back in, enough to make the agent think she had caught Seraphina in a lie. And if that was true, everything was about to fall apart. An hour later, Seraphina sat in a conference room at Federal Plaza. Beside her sat Martin Green, her father's lawyer, a man who had successfully defended 3 mob bosses and never lost a federal case. Across from them, Torres and Webb looked grimmer than before. Torres slid a document across the table. "Care to explain this, Ms. Cross?" Seraphina looked down. It was a wire transfer from one of her shell companies to an account registered in the Cayman Islands, dated 6 months ago. $200 million. Her blood went cold. "I don't know what this is," she said carefully. "It's a transfer you authorized. We have your electronic signature." "That's impossible. I never—" "The account in the Caymans belongs to a company called Moretti Holdings." Torres leaned forward. "Care to tell me why you're sending $200 million to your father's company while claiming you haven't spoken to him in 7 years? The room tilted. Seraphina stared at the document, at the signature that looked exactly like hers, at the account number she had never seen before. Someone had set her up. But who? "My client has no knowledge of this transaction," Green said smoothly, "and an electronic signature proves nothing. They can be faked, as I'm sure you're aware. Not one's authenticated through 3 separate security protocols." Torres pulled out more documents. "We also have emails between Ms. Cross and known Moretti associates, meetings logged by surveillance, phone records showing regular contact." She spread the evidence across the table like a winning hand of cards. "So I'm going to ask you one more time, Ms. Cross. What is your relationship with Vittorio Moretti?" Seraphina couldn't breathe. Every piece of evidence Torres had just shown her was real. But she hadn't sent that money, hadn't written those emails, hadn't made those calls. Someone had. Someone with access to her accounts, her security protocols, her entire digital life. And suddenly she knew exactly who. Jonathan Price. The man who had been playing both sides. The man who had access to everything. The man who knew every move she was going to make before she made it. He had set her up, built a perfect frame that would destroy her and protect himself. And she had walked right into it. "I need to make a phone call," Seraphina said quietly. "You can make all the calls you want after you answer my question." "I invoke my Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination." Torres smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "I thought you had nothing to hide, Miss Cross." Seraphina said nothing. Green stood. "This interview is over. My client is leaving. Your client is under arrest." Torres stood as well. "Seraphina Cross, you're being charged with conspiracy to commit wire fraud, money laundering, and racketeering." She pulled out handcuffs. "You have the right to remain silent." The rest faded to static. Seraphina felt the cold metal close around her wrists, felt herself being pulled to her feet, felt the world she had built for herself shatter into pieces too small to ever put back together. They walked her out through the building in handcuffs. The cameras were waiting, and as the flashbulbs exploded like artillery fire, Seraphina understood with perfect clarity that she had lost. Not to Damien, not to the FBI, to herself. She had become exactly what she had tried so hard to escape. Her father's daughter, a criminal, a monster. And there was no coming back from that. The holding cell smelled like disinfectant and fear. Seraphina sat on the metal bench with her hands folded in her lap, still wearing the cream suit that was supposed to make her look innocent. The fabric was wrinkled now, creased from hours of sitting, waiting, existing in a space designed to strip away dignity 1 fluorescent minute at a time. She had been here for 6 hours. No phone call yet, no lawyer visit, just silence and the distant sound of other inmates talking through walls too thin to hold secrets. Her mind kept circling back to the same question. How had Jonathan done it? The answer came slowly, piece by piece, like a puzzle assembling itself in reverse. He had access to everything. Every account, every security protocol, every digital footprint she had ever left. As her father's man inside Cross Global, he had been perfectly positioned to create a shadow version of her life. One that looked real on paper, but was actually a carefully constructed frame. The wire transfers, the emails, the phone records, all fake. All designed to make her look like exactly what the FBI wanted her to be. A criminal hiding behind the mask of an innocent wife. And she had never seen it coming. The cell door opened. Martin Green stood in the doorway, his expression grim. They're offering a deal, he said without preamble. Seraphina looked up. What kind of deal? 20 years, reduced to 7 with good behavior. You plead guilty to conspiracy and money laundering. In exchange, they want full cooperation. Names, dates, financial records. Everything you know about Moretti family operations. They want me to betray my father. Yes. Seraphina laughed. It came out hollow and strange in the concrete space. What happens if I refuse? Trial. Federal conspiracy charges carry life sentences if they can prove RICO violations. With the evidence they have, conviction is almost certain. Green sat beside her on the bench. You're looking at spending the rest of your life in prison, Seraphina. The rest of her life. The word should have terrified her. Instead, she felt only a strange calm settling over her shoulders like a familiar coat. Can I make a phone call? She asked. Yes. 1. Who do you want to call? Seraphina thought about it. She could call her father, hear him promise to fix this, to make it all go away. She could call Carlo, hear his gruff voice telling her to stay strong. She could even call Damien, hear whatever pathetic justification he had prepared for his betrayal. But there was only one person she actually wanted to talk to. Jonathan Price, she said quietly. Green's eyebrows rose. The man who set you up? Yes. That's not advisable. I don't care. Get him on the phone. 20 minutes later, Seraphina stood in a private room with a phone pressed to her ear. The line rang twice before Jonathan answered. Seraphina. His voice was carefully neutral. I heard about your arrest. Did you? Her voice was ice. Must have been quite a surprise. Silence on the other end. Why? She asked. Just tell me why. Because you were going to get caught eventually. The FBI has been circling for 2 years. They would have found something, built a case, dragged your entire family down. Jonathan's voice remained steady. This way, it's clean. You take the fall. Your father stays protected. The empire survives. So you sacrificed me. I protected what matters. I matter. The words came out sharper than she intended. I'm Vittorio Moretti's daughter. I'm the heir. You're a woman who spent 7 years pretending to be someone else. You're a liability, Seraphina. You always were. Jonathan paused. Your father knows this. He's already making arrangements to move on without you. The words hit like a physical blow. You're lying. Am I? Call him. Ask him what he's doing right now. Ask him if he's planning your rescue or your replacement. Seraphina's hand tightened on the phone. If you're working for my father, why are you telling me this? Because I'm not working for your father anymore. I'm working for myself. Jonathan's voice dropped. The FBI offered me full immunity and witness protection in exchange for testimony against the Moretti family. I took it. I've been building a case for 8 months. You were just the final piece I needed. You used me. Yes. The same way your father used you. The same way Damien used you. The same way everyone in your life has always used you. He paused. The difference is I'm honest about it. Seraphina closed her eyes, felt the last fragile piece of trust inside her shatter into dust. I hope it was worth it, she said quietly. It was. I get to disappear, start over, live a normal life somewhere far from all this. Jonathan's voice softened slightly. You could have done the same, you know, if you had just walked away when you had the chance. I don't walk away. I know. That's why you're in a cell, and I'm not. The line went dead. Seraphina stood holding the phone for a long moment. Then she set it carefully back in its cradle and turned to face Green. I need to see my father, she said. That's not possible. He's not allowed. Make it possible. Something in her voice made the lawyer stop arguing. He nodded once and left. 2 hours later, they brought Vittorio to her. Not to the cell, to a private visiting room with a glass partition and phones on either side. Her father sat down slowly, his face older than she had ever seen it. The lines around his eyes had deepened. His shoulders carried weight that hadn't been there a week ago. They looked at each other through bulletproof glass. Seraphina picked up the phone. Vittorio did the same. Papa, she said quietly. Figlia mia. His voice was rough, strained. I'm going to fix this, I promise. Whatever it takes. Jonathan told me everything. Vittorio went still. He said you're already planning to move on without me, that I'm a liability you can't afford anymore. Seraphina watched her father's face carefully. Is that true? For a long moment, Vittorio said nothing. She could see the calculation happening behind his eyes, the weighing of truth against comfort, honesty against protection. Finally, he spoke. Yes. The word landed like a bullet. The FBI has enough evidence to destroy the entire family if you go to trial. They'll trace every connection, every account, every operation we've run for 30 years. Vittorio's voice remained steady. I've spent the last 6 hours moving assets, closing accounts, severing ties. By tomorrow, there will be no paper trail connecting you to anything. You're erasing me. I'm protecting the family. It's what I've always done. I am family. Yes, but you're also the one who got caught. Vittorio leaned forward slightly. I taught you better than this, Seraphina. I taught you never to leave evidence, never to trust anyone completely, never to let emotion cloud judgment. You taught me a lot of things, Papa, but you never taught me how to stop being your daughter. Something flickered across his face. Pain, maybe, or regret. If there was another way, he started. There isn't. I know that. Seraphina's voice was calm, final. The FBI wants me to testify against you. They're offering 7 years instead of life. Vittorio's expression hardened. What did you tell them? Nothing. Yet. She paused. But I'm going to. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. You wouldn't, Vittorio said finally. Why not? You just told me you're cutting me loose, erasing me, moving on without me. Seraphina felt something cold and sharp settle into her chest. You want to protect the family. I want to protect myself. Seems like we're both making the same choice. If you testify against me, you'll be a dead woman. Witness protection or not. There's nowhere on earth you could hide. Maybe, but at least I'll be alive, which is more than I can say if I spend the rest of my life in federal prison. Vittorio's hand tightened on the phone. I raised you better than this. I taught you loyalty, honor, family above all else. You taught me survival, Papa. You taught me that the only person you can really trust is yourself. You taught me that power matters more than love. Seraphina's voice cracked slightly. And now I'm using those lessons. Seraphina, I loved Damien. I trusted him, and he betrayed me. I trusted Jonathan. He betrayed me. I trusted you to protect me, and you're abandoning me. She looked at her father through the glass. So why should I sacrifice myself for people who wouldn't do the same for me? Vittorio stared at her. She could see him struggling with it, the daughter he had raised versus the criminal he had created. The love buried under decades of violence and calculation. Because, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper, you're better than all of us. The words hit harder than anything else he could have said. No, I'm not, Seraphina said quietly. I'm exactly like you. I just didn't want to admit it. She hung up the phone, watched her father sit on the other side of the glass, the phone still pressed to his ear, his face crumbling in a way she had never seen before. Then she stood and walked away. Back in the holding cell, Seraphina sat in silence and thought about the choices that had brought her here. Loving Damien, trusting Jonathan, trying to escape her father's legacy while simultaneously building an empire with his methods. Every decision had seemed right at the time. Every decision had led her here. To a cell that smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams. The door opened again. Special Agent Torres stood in the doorway. Ms. Cross, we need to talk. Seraphina looked up. I'm ready to make a deal. Torres's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Satisfaction, maybe. Or victory. Come with me. They walked through corridors that all looked the same until they reached a conference room Seraphina hadn't seen before. Inside, a stenographer waited. A recording device. Martin Green sitting in the corner looking like he had aged 10 years. Torres sat across from her. Before we begin, I need to make something clear. Once you start cooperating, there's no going back. You will be required to testify in open court. Your name will be public. Your father and his associates will know exactly what you said. I understand. And you accept the terms? 7 years federal custody in exchange for full cooperation? Seraphina looked at the recording device, at Torres, at the lawyer who couldn't protect her from this choice. I accept. Torres pressed record. Interview with Seraphina Cross, May 8th. Ms. Cross, please state your relationship to Vittorio Moretti. And Seraphina began to talk. She told them everything. Not because she wanted to, not because she believed it was right, but because survival meant making impossible choices. And she had finally learned the lesson her father had been trying to teach her all along. In the end, everyone saves themselves. The testimony took 3 days. Seraphina sat in that conference room and dismantled her father's empire piece by piece, named names, provided dates, drew maps of the invisible network that had shaped Manhattan's power structure for 3 decades. She told them about the money laundering operations running through legitimate businesses, the politicians who took bribes, the judges who looked the other way, the entire ecosystem of corruption that allowed the Moretti family to operate in plain sight. She told them about Cross Global, about how she had used her father's resources to build Damien's empire, about every illegal move they had made together, wrapped in the fiction of legitimate business. And she told them about herself, about the woman who had spent 7 years trying to be someone else, about the heir who had run from her legacy only to recreate it with different names and cleaner hands. When it was over, Torres turned off the recording device. That should be sufficient, she said. Seraphina felt hollow, emptied out, like someone had reached inside her chest and removed everything vital, leaving only the mechanical parts still functioning out of habit. What happens now? She asked. Processing. Transfer to a federal facility. You'll serve your sentence in protective custody. Torres paused. For what it's worth, Ms. Cross, I believe you when you say you didn't know the full extent of your husband's crimes, but you made choices. You have to live with them. I know. Green walked her back to the holding cell. At the door, he stopped. Your father wants to see you again, he said quietly. No. Seraphina. I said no, I'm done. With him. With all of it. She looked at the lawyer. Tell him I said goodbye. Green nodded slowly. Then he left. Alone again, Seraphina lay down on the metal bench and stared at the ceiling. She thought about Damien, about where he was right now, probably in his own cell somewhere, waiting for his own trial. She wondered if he understood yet that they had both destroyed each other, that their love had been real but also toxic, built on foundations too weak to support the weight of their ambitions. She thought about Jonathan, about his new life in witness protection, far from the empire he had helped dismantle. She hoped it made him happy. She hoped it was worth the cost. And she thought about Maya, about the girl who would grow up knowing her father was a criminal, and the woman who had loved him was too. She hoped someone would tell Maya that loving the wrong person didn't make you wrong. It just made you human. The days blurred together after that. Processing, transfers, medical exams, psychological evaluations, the machinery of federal incarceration grinding her down into something manageable, something that fit into their system. 3 weeks after her arrest, they transferred her to a minimum security facility in Pennsylvania. Clean, quiet. Nothing like the prison she had seen in movies. She had a cell to herself, a small room with a bed, a desk, a window that looked out over farmland that stretched to the horizon. It could have been worse. She kept telling herself that. It could have been worse. On her second day there, a guard brought her a letter. No return address. Just her name written in familiar handwriting. Seraphina opened it carefully. Inside was a single page. Her father's writing. Figlia mia, I have spent 30 years building an empire. I have made enemies, broken laws, hurt people who didn't deserve it. I have done terrible things in the name of family, power, survival. But the worst thing I ever did was teach you to be like me. You deserved better. You deserved a normal life, a clean life. Love that didn't cost everything. I failed you. Not when you got caught, not when you testified. I failed you the day you were born into this family, and I decided that was more important than who you could have become. You are free now, not from prison, that is temporary, but from me, from the legacy, from the weight of being a Moretti. Use this time to become someone new, someone better. I love you. I always have, even when I couldn't show it, even now. Papa Seraphina read the letter 3 times. Then she folded it carefully and placed it in the desk drawer. She didn't cry. There would be time for that later, years maybe. Long nights when the weight of everything she had lost would crush down on her chest and make breathing impossible. But right now, in this moment, she felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Peace. The trial happened without her. She watched it on the news in the common room, surrounded by other inmates who didn't know who she really was. Just another white-collar criminal serving time for financial crimes. Damien looked small on the screen, diminished. He pleaded guilty to avoid trial, took a deal for 12 years. His empire dissolved overnight. Cross Global ceased to exist, its assets distributed to creditors, its name becoming synonymous with fraud and failure. Celeste never came back from Paris. Seraphina heard she had married a French banker, started over, smart woman. Vittorio Moretti was indicted on 17 counts of racketeering, conspiracy, and money laundering. The trial lasted 4 months. The jury deliberated for 6 days, guilty on all counts. 40 years federal prison. He would die there. They both knew it. On the day of his sentencing, Seraphina sat in her cell and thought about her father, about the man who had taught her to shoot when she was 12, who had told her bedtime stories about queens and kingdoms, who had loved her the only way he knew how. She thought about going to see him. She didn't. Some doors, once closed, should stay that way. The months passed. Seraphina fell into routine, work in the library, classes for her eventual release, therapy sessions where she talked about trauma and choices and the cost of becoming someone you never wanted to be. She made no friends, kept her head down, served her time quietly, and at night, alone in her cell, she planned, not for revenge, not for rebuilding, but for something new. A life beyond the empire, beyond the legacy, beyond everything she had been. She didn't know what that looked like yet, but she had 7 years to figure it out. On a Tuesday, 18 months into her sentence, a guard brought her another letter. This one had a return address in California. Seraphina opened it carefully. Inside was a photograph and a note. The photograph showed Maya Cross standing in front of a university building, wearing a graduation cap and gown, smiling at the camera. Healthy, alive, free. The note was short. Thank you for saving my mother. Thank you for telling the truth. Thank you for being brave enough to walk away. I don't know if my father deserved your love, but I know you deserved better than what he gave you. I hope someday you find the peace you're looking for. Maya Seraphina stared at the photograph for a long time. Then she pinned it to the wall above her desk. The first decoration in her cell. The first piece of a life that wasn't about power or revenge or empire. Just a reminder that somewhere in the world, someone had been saved by her choices. Someone was living because she had found the strength to do the right thing, even when it cost everything. It wasn't enough to erase what she had done, but it was something. 5.5 years later, Seraphina walked out of federal prison into morning sunlight that felt like forgiveness. She was 41 years old. She owned nothing except the clothes on her back and a small account her lawyer had set up. Money from the sale of assets the government hadn't seized. Enough to start over. Nothing more. Carlo was waiting at the gate. He looked older, grayer, but his eyes held the same steady loyalty they always had. Principessa, he said quietly. Don't call me that anymore. He nodded. What should I call you? Seraphina thought about it, about all the names she had carried. Moretti, Cross, La Regina Nera, the invisible wife, the criminal, the informant. None of them fit anymore. Just Seraphina, she said. Carlo opened the car door. Where do you want to go? She looked back at the prison, at the building that had held her for so long, at the life she was leaving behind. Then she looked forward, at the road stretching into the distance, at the future waiting to be written. Somewhere new, she said. Somewhere nobody knows who I used to be. The car pulled onto the highway heading west. Behind them, Manhattan shrank into the distance, the city where she had been a daughter, a wife, a queen, a prisoner, where she had loved and lost and learned what it meant to survive the cost of becoming yourself. She would never go back, but she would never forget. 6 months later, Seraphina sat in a small coffee shop in Seattle, watching rain streak the windows. She worked as a paralegal now. Quiet work. Anonymous. She helped people navigate the legal system. Immigrants, people with criminal records, anyone who needed someone who understood how the system worked from the inside. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't power, but it was clean. Her phone buzzed. A message from Maya, who called every few weeks just to check in. They had built a strange kind of friendship, two women trying to survive the wreckage of the same man's choices. The message was simple. How are you? Seraphina thought about how to answer that. She wasn't happy. Not yet. Maybe never. But she wasn't drowning anymore either. She was learning to breathe again, learning to exist without the weight of legacy pressing down on her shoulders, learning that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from everything you thought you wanted and build something smaller, quieter, real. She typed back, I'm okay. Getting there. It was enough. Outside, the rain continued falling. Inside, Seraphina finished her coffee and opened her laptop to work on a case for a single mother fighting a wrongful eviction. Small stakes. Human stakes. The kind of fight that actually mattered. And somewhere deep inside her chest, in the place where the Empire used to live, something new was growing. Not power. Not revenge. Just the quiet certainty that she had survived. That she was still here. That tomorrow she would wake up and choose to be better than yesterday. And the day after that, she would choose it again. It wasn't the ending she had imagined when she stood in that ballroom, wearing war black and obsidian, ready to destroy the man who had betrayed her. It wasn't the ending her father would have wanted, but it was hers. And for the first time in her life, that was enough. The rain outside turned to mist. Seraphina looked up from her laptop and saw the sun breaking through clouds. She stood, gathered her things, and walked out into the afternoon light. Behind her, the coffee shop door closed with a gentle chime. Ahead, the street stretched forward into a city that didn't know her name. And Seraphina, just Seraphina, no longer a queen, no longer a prisoner, just a woman learning to live with her scars, walked into the rest of her life. Free. Finally, free.